Number 1. One snowy evening. This is absolutely a very scary story that happened to me a couple of decades ago. For a while I haven't really wanted to tell it that much though. It was just way too scary of a memory for me to have. I used to live in a one-bedroom apartment. I lived alone, and I didn't have any pets. I pretty much live that way now too, because I really like it. I do have a bit of an odd quirk though. You might think it's odd because I live alone. But even though I live alone in the house, I have to sleep with my bedroom door closed. If I leave the door open, I absolutely will not even fall asleep. I really don't know why this is the case, but that is something that continues to this day. This happened during the winter months. I come home from work, did my normal routine that I do after a day of work, and I can't tell you that I really remember much about the day though. I was pretty positive it was snowing outside too, and that always makes me a little sleepy as well. I woke up and my room was, of course, pitch black. I don't even have my clock facing my bed, because the light from the numbers would keep me awake. So I didn't even know what time it was. All I knew was that it was still dark, and I could see the snow still falling outside of the house. I wasn't really sure what woke me up either. All I knew was that it was a pretty jarring way to wake up. My mind was still a little bit fuzzy from waking up like that. After looking around and listening, and not hearing anything that was unusual, I decided it was a chance thing, and I decided to just go back to sleep. It was when I was laying down then that I heard it. The doorknob of my bedroom door was being turned, and the door was being slowly opened. There was no doubt about that at all. Someone had to have broken into my house, and that was probably what had woken me up. I wasn't sure how to handle this. I don't believe in the supernatural, so I didn't for one moment think that it was a ghost. I knew it was a break-in, but I didn't know what the intentions of that person was. I decided not to move and pretend I was sleeping. Yeah, I know, that doesn't sound very courageous, but I had a good reason for it. If the intruder was simply there to steal things and not hurt me, confronting him could make the situation a lot worse. I've heard plenty of stories of people having a break-in that turned into a violent encounter. I figured that my health and life were worth more than anything I owned. So I just pretended to be asleep, and that I hadn't noticed anything at all. It was difficult and scary doing that, but other than slightly opening my eye here and there in order to look around, I didn't move or indicate in any way that I was awake. Hearing an intruder walking around in your room is a really tense thing, especially when I heard him going through things in my room, opening my drawers and my dresser, and things like that. But mostly throughout the encounter, I just kept my eyes closed. After a period of time, it was just quiet in my room, but I hadn't heard anything that would have indicated that the guy had left the room. But I also hadn't heard anything at all, so I began wondering if I should look quickly. I very slowly opened my eyes to check out what was going on, and I don't know why and I don't know how, but I picked the moment to open my eyes when the guy was looking right at my face. It was too late to close them back up. I don't know how long the next moment lasted, but it seemed like a long time when our eyes locked. Both of us must have been expecting the other to do something, but it was tense and very frightening. Well, he bolted out the bedroom door, and when he did, rather than pursue him, I got up, closed and locked the door, and called the police. He dropped the things he was stealing from me. I guess in order to get away, I don't know. He was still picked up by the police. He was connected to several burglaries in the neighborhood. No idea what happened to him, and I really don't care. Number 2. This incident happened about a year and a half ago. I was visiting my boyfriend one afternoon in San Pedro, California, and it was really warm that day, so a lot of people were outside. My boyfriend lives in a sketchy part of town, but it's all he can afford. The street he lives on is cracked and bumpy, and it's kind of narrow. It's almost like an obstacle course on garbage day, because people will put their cans out on the street for collection. After we'd had a particularly fun afternoon together, he had to go to his job for the evening shift. My boyfriend walked me down to the street, to my car, before leaving himself, just to make sure I got there safely. Once we reached it, we said goodbye, and he turned back to go to his car garage so he could leave. As he re-entered the building, my eye caught some movement on the sidewalk near me. A man was rummaging through one of the garbage cans put out that day. This man looked pretty dirty and old, and his hair was white and messy. He had really raggedy clothes on, as well as being barefoot, and held an empty bottle for multivitamins in one hand. The sight of this man really disturbed me, because I hadn't noticed him at first, and he had an odd way of walking, like his hips were moving side to side when he walked. I hoped I would go unnoticed by him, at least until I got in my car, because he seemed like he was possibly strung out on something, and would likely be unpleasant. Unfortunately, he looked up from the garbage can and made eye contact with me as I was unlocking my door, because my Prius makes a beeping noise when it unlocks. I silently sat down in my seat and closed the door. The man, still staring at me, shouted out, "Hey! Hey!" and moved towards me. Beginning to feel panicked, I started my car, and I quickly turned the wheel to pull away from the curb. As I began to move, he then bolted up to the front of my car to block me. I stopped, not sure what to do next. He then raised his arms, seemingly in a beckoning pose, as if he was daring me to hit him with my car. I tried to yell at him through the window to stop what he was doing and leave me alone, and I began crying in hysteria. The man then proceeded to approach the car, and then he leaned forward onto the hood, staring alternatively at his vitamin bottle and back at me with a weird, disgusted look on his face. I honestly didn't know what to do. What was this guy trying to do? Had I offended him? I don't see how I could have. I'm pretty unthreatening in appearance, a clean-cut, petite 25-year-old woman who looks fairly young at first glance. I may have looked frightened to him, but I don't think that should cause offense, since he had startled me. In any case, he was physically blocking my exit at this point, and I was terrified. I begged him to let me go, but he wouldn't move. Almost instinctively, I picked up my cell phone and dialed 911. As he watched, I babbled into the phone to the operator that a man was on my car. The operator repeatedly tried to calm me down, asking me what I was referring to. "Sorry, ma'am? Who? What man? Where are you located?" I was in such a panic that all I could get out was, "Please hurry, he's on my car and he won't let me go." After a few moments, which seemed to me like forever, the man finally stood back up and backed away. He must have realized what I was doing, so after that, he slowly moved on. Frozen in panic, I watched him leave in the rearview mirror until he rounded the corner. Once he was out of sight, I drove away as quickly as I could. The operator called out to me, "Ma'am, are you alright?" Snapping out of my anxiety, I replied yes, and hung up the line. As I drove away, I noticed a neighboring woman had been observing nearby, probably the whole time, but had done nothing. I could tell she wanted to say something to me, but I just wanted to get out of there. So I kept going. I called my boyfriend to tell him what had happened, since he had not observed any of this. While all this had been happening, he had driven off to work, and had just missed the whole thing right before it started. Since that time, He has made sure to see me off, no matter the situation, or even if he was running late for something. And he felt terrible that he hadn't known. I still visit him there, at his apartment building, despite what happened, and now I keep a wary eye out when I'm outside, even during the day, such as when this happened. It was probably the scariest thing that I ever experienced, certainly in the city for sure. I urge everyone else to try and be aware of their surroundings these days. Number 3. A story that goes through 3 generations. And like the title says, this story goes back 3 generations, starting with my grandma, my mom's mom, then my mom, and last me. First, you gotta understand my grandma was a caring, loving, no-nonsense Christian woman. She just didn't tell her grandchild scary stories to scare us. So when I was in my teens, and my grandma shared the story with me, I was all ears. My grandma was born in the mid-1930s, so this would have taken place around the early 1940s. She grew up dirt poor, and with 11 brothers and sisters, and it was on a farm. So playtime came very little, and when it did come, she and her sister, who was closer to her age, would go and play in the yard, making dirty pies and such. It was one of those afternoons that both of them were playing close to a cornfield. Both of them heard something running hard and fast to them. Now, Grandma said no one should have been running after them, and this scared them both, so they did what every scared child does: run for Mama. They got into the house crying and slammed the door behind them. A god-awful banging on the door started from the top of the door to the bottom, making the door shake. My great-grandma told the girls to open the door, that they had a cat's tail closed in it. But they wouldn't do it, and children in that time didn't go against their mom and dad, so great-grandma knew they were scared. All this time the knocking was non-stop, so she went to the door to show her children nothing was there but a cat. Now Grandma said they only had one cat, and when the door was open, the knocking stopped, and the cat was sitting in the yard under a tree, happy. Grandma said she didn't know what it was, and to be honest, she didn't care to know. And for her, that was the end. Now fast forward to the 1970s, and to my mom, and again she is the same way as Grandma. No nonsense. My grandma's father lived next door, and it was my mom and uncle's responsibility to take him his dinner every night. Now before my great-grandpa moved into the house next door, my grandma blocked the back door, so it was one way in and one way out. There was a big patch of woods right out the back door, and they were scared that at his age he might walk out that door and get lost in the night. But back to the story. One night my mom and uncle were getting his dinner ready and talking when knocking from the top to the bottom of the door started and shaking the whole door. My mom said her and her brother got the hell out of there. No questions asked. It scared them. She and my uncle said they didn't believe it was a person. It was different from that. She said she just didn't know what it was, and was happy not to know. Now for me and my husband. We lived next door to the same uncle and grandma. To help you understand why we did what we did, you have to understand my grandma had a small heart attack not too long before this. We lived in a small mobile home, and it was old, so didn't always have the best cell service. Keep this all in mind. This was the early 2000s, and late at night, and we both had worked a long day, and were about to fall asleep, when we heard a hard knocking on the front door. We both jumped out of bed, running to the door, thinking something was wrong with Grandma, and my uncle couldn't get to us on the phone. I remember my husband yelling my uncle's name, and we're coming, and to hold on. The knocking was non-stop, even when my husband was unlocking the door. But when he opened the door, no one was there. Now we live in the country, like only a few houses, and we had no places for anyone to hide in the yard. And plus, we had one of those big night lights outside that the light company put out, so we could see good. And there was no one. Of course we were both shocked, and sleep didn't come back so easy. Now here's where my story changes from the others. It happened again the next night, the very same way as it did the first night, only this time my husband grabbed his baseball bat and ran outside, but there was nothing to run after. He said outside of some cats and bugs, no one was out there. Now, for me, I'm a God-believing woman, but I believe there are things in this world we don't know of and do not understand. I can't tell what it was, and I now have a daughter that I can't help but wonder if it will happen to her. Every generation was a little older than the next, so she's getting closer to the age I was when it happened to me. So the only thing is to sit and wait, I guess.
Hey all, Killer Orange Cat here. If you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, please feel free to hit the subscribe button and the bell below, or wait for the icon of Ichigo the cat that will appear at the end of this closing. Leave me a comment to let me know what you thought of the video, and consider sharing it with someone you think might enjoy it. If you have an original story you'd like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please email it to the address included in the description. But most importantly, don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.